Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte. In our upper echelon slot this week, Hubert Brody, Chief Executive of Imperial. It's strange, Hubert, it feels like you've been in the hot seat forever almost. It's only been 4 years. And it's also, I guess, you're still a young man. You haven't yet hit 50. But going through my research and finding out more about you, I was intrigued to note that you actually were a banker in a previous life.
Yes, Alec, thanks. After I finished my articles, I actually worked in banking for about 13 years. If you include the 3 years at Imperial Bank, I worked at First National Bank in the Treasury and the international business operations. And I worked at Absa on retail banking in the call center activities, so a wide range of banking exposure that I had, and then that pulled me into Imperial Bank, which was obviously the big opportunity that I got, and I was very attracted to it also because of being aware of what an entrepreneurial business Imperial would be.
Was there any relationship between Absa and Imperial at the time?
No, that was
competitors.
Absa and Imperial Bank. Look, to Imperial Bank at the time had assets of only 1.3 billion, so it was minute in the real scale of banking, and it had just actually started as a motor finance bank. But an unbelievable thing is that in 10 years, since its inception in about 97, it grew to more than 50 billion of assets by 2010, when Imperial sold it to Nedbank. So it was really testimony to the entrepreneurial spirit of Imperial and the big visions which particularly Bill Lynch had, and making that happen.
And that's where the interesting part comes in. When you took over from Bill Lynch in 2007, you'd been working with him for 4 years. Many outsiders, though, felt that here was this chartered accountant who was going to mess up everything that Bill had actually created. And, of course, he was the world's best entrepreneur, having won that award
Yes.
in 2006. First of all, how did you feel about that? Because clearly you've been fairly entrepreneurial in your own way.
Look, I had at that time worked, very closely with him for a couple of years. Sort of had an office next to him for about 4 years, from 2003 to 2007. So one did get exposure to a lot of his thinking, and generally of the thinking and the culture of Imperial as a whole. But no doubt when Bill passed away and I got the nod, it was extremely daunting, because we also were at a point where we knew certain structural adjustments had to be made to the group. So, it wasn't completely business as usual, as you well aware, which is probably a bit of an understatement. We needed to deal with things. The aviation industry was really in a difficult time. We needed to sell the aviation business. We saw that our balance sheet was way overweight with borrowings that came out of the leasing industry. We were starting to look like a bank, and we needed to restructure that and basically split the Imperial between its asset-heavy businesses and its retailing and trading-like businesses. So it was a very deep structural thing that needed to happen at that time. And I was aware that it was going to be a difficult phase.
You say it needed to happen. Why?
Yeah, the scale of Imperial became such. It became a business that just didn't have that kind of ability to move and to be flexible and to be able to react quickly in the markets, to borrow as we could in the past. Because, as I said, it started to look like a hybrid between a bank and an industrial business. One of the examples is the total funding facilities of the group for all of the assets, the aircraft that we had, the big leasing books. We were at some stage around 20 billion of funding. Now that's a big number to just purely fund out of the local South African markets, and we simply would not have had the capacity to grow if we hadn't split the group and if we hadn't got out of the aviation industry.
A very complex business as well, and I think that was where a lot of the investment analysts were concerned at the time that you took over. It was almost like, well, this is the house that Bill built. He knows all the complexities. Who else could? Yet you said about simplifying things pretty quickly. Did you have much internal resistance?
We, as a team, came to the conclusion that this was the only way to go forward. And if we wanted to continue growing the organization, and if we didn't want to stifle that entrepreneurial spirit that you see right through Imperial, we needed to create a lot more headroom for future growth. And we were all very, very well aware that we were stifling this engine. And the Imperial engine is absolutely built on continuous growth, continuously finding opportunities. So it was sort of partly a cultural kind of understanding as well, and that we needed to do that. In the detail, obviously, there was sometimes heated debate about exactly how we needed to do the different transactions which we do. But as a principle, it was well understood that was what was required.
You know, sometimes I get quite frustrated with people in my sector, in the financial journalism sector, when they don't understand that the language of business, in fact, is accounting. Now, that's something that you've never had a problem with, having been a chartered accountant. But is it difficult, or how in a complex business like that, which you have to make radical changes as you had to do at Imperial, how does one communicate that to staff who generally don't understand the language of business or accounting as well as you do?
Alec, you need to translate it into very understandable messages, and then that same message one needs to consistently speak for quite a while during that period. You know, you give the message just once, people might not take you that seriously, or just a couple of people understand it at that time. But if you consistently speak that simple business-orientated message, not a technical accounting kind of message, because that wasn't our issue. It wasn't technical accounting issues. It was actually how do we run the business in the future. So consistently talk about the message, repeat it. Sometimes boring for people that's heard it a couple of times. But in that way, we needed to reach the top 300, 400 people. That's about the top management team of our group, and they all needed to understand which changes had to be made.
Hubert, you presumably travel a lot. You've got considerable interests outside of South Africa.
Yes, I do. Mostly to Germany. We have a very important business in Germany, our shipping and ports logistics business there, and I'll be on my way there soon again. And but we're a very sort of a close team with our colleagues in Germany. So it's fun to go there. We know each other very well. We really deeply trust each other, and we want team. So I also enjoy the interaction. I sometimes am a little bit sorry that I haven't made the effort to learn German, because that would have even made the enjoyment of it even more.
What about here on the continent? Because you do have operations going as far north as the DRC. Do you get into your trucks from time to time and go and see what's happening on the ground?
Yes, I do. I visit our operations in Africa. I've done that recently as well. But a lot of our operations in Africa are still based in South Africa, and it does long distance sort of legs out of South Africa along the important corridors. On the other hand, what's put a different dimension in our business are the different distribution depots through the acquisition of CIC that we now have in a number of African countries. And that has created specific head offices in a couple of countries, which could really be the nucleus for us as we grow across the continent. And as we already have an operational activity with administration management structures in a number of places now, which I see as a great opportunity for us.
Just on a personal basis, you came to the job at a young age. In fact, you've had responsibility at a young age, and you've been thrust into the media spotlight over the past few years as chief executive of such a big company. How do you find, first of all, the advantage or disadvantage of being a young chief executive?
Alec, it certainly is somewhat daunting in the beginning. Maybe sometimes when one is a little bit naive, maybe you don't see completely the complexity and the issues that's ahead of you. It is also so that one is not, often one of the younger members of the total management team, because ultimately we're a whole team running the group. So that introduces certain dynamics, but that's dealt with if there's maturity with everybody, as we've seen in Imperial. And one had to think very, very carefully through that whole first phase yes, not about only about the business structural issues, but about the interaction and the cultural issues of how the team operates and the like.
But what about being in the media spotlight, going off from radio studio to the next radio studio, television interviews, press interviews? You strike me as a person who would rather operate below the spotlight.
Alec, I am quite a private type of person. I like to retreat back into my small circle of friends and family and my wife and kids. But it certainly doesn't come as a first choice and completely naturally to do the media interaction. On the other hand, there's certain aspects of it which I enjoy, and I enjoy speaking about Imperial. I'm very, very proud of our organization and the people that we have, and like to tell people like yourself and so about all the interesting aspects of the group. So you also find that it's nice to speak about and nice to tell people the interesting news and information on our group.
You haven't been too scared to take controversial positions. The whole of Gauteng, it seems, is up in arms over the toll roads, and yet Hubert Brody says they're a good thing. Alec, I guess you got a vested interest in that, haven't you?
Alec, what we actually said about toll roads is that the roads is a very good thing, and that we really need very good roads around Gauteng. Gauteng is the heart of South African economic activity, and we really need the efficiency of the freeways around Gauteng. The method to pay for it could be a couple of methods. A pay-as-you-go kind of method, which could also be something like a fuel levy, something like that. Struck me as an appropriate tool. But these things have to be now finally dealt through different industry bodies. That finally everything gets resolved, and the interactions with SANRAL will hopefully bear fruit to get the ultimate resolution of it to work for all.
Reading through some of the information that's been published on you in the past, I noticed the Financial Mail referred to your grandfather, who was an East European circus performer. There are not too many chief executives of that kind of pedigree.
Yeah, he was born in South Africa, but his family was Eastern European, and very soon, at a very young stage, he was separated from his family, and he was in a school or in a setup which he hated, and he escaped and ran away, and he started working for a circus that was which was touring South Africa, and he had a very strange, interesting act that he did in the circus, which people found very, very humorous, and it was obviously the story when we were kids that he told us as children many, many times, and which we always loved to hear. And ultimately, he became a headmaster of a school. He worked very hard in his life to achieve what he finally did, and there was also quite a lesson in that.
Strong independent spirit, though. I remember growing up threatening my parents more than once. I'll leave to go and join the circus, but
well, he did.
He did. And from your side, the work ethic, the discipline, does that come through from perhaps your grandfather?
Yes, it comes through from my grandfather, from my father as well. My father's an ophthalmologist, and I always saw him work very, very hard. And I thought, if I don't go into medicine, maybe business could be easier, which didn't prove to be the case. It was also very hard. A lot of hard work. I have a very hard working ethic. I put in many hours. I think I particularly put in lots of actual work hours in my 20s and my 30s. And now a lot of one's hours is actually spending in debating and thinking and considering things. But I work hard and long hours.
And you're from the Cape?
I'm from the Cape. I wasn't born there. I was born in Durban. But I grew up in the Cape until after university, and in about 1990 I moved up to Johannesburg.
What people would not realize is that you could be described as a member of the Stellenbosch Mafia. Well, at least you went to Stellenbosch University. Is the old, jokes aside, is the old boys network of the ex-Stellenbosch students strong?
As you mentioned earlier, I'm quite a private person. I'm in quite a small group of friends. I'm not networking and keeping thousands of connections up is really not my not my forte, and I'm certainly not part of a group like that. On the other hand, when we see the old university friends, one is immediately there's a lot that one has in common that that you talk about and that you have a good laugh about. But generally, I'm not. That's not me.
A bit like Bill in that way.
Yeah, I'm quite private.
Bill Lynch, that is, the predecessor and the man who built Imperial. Hubert Brody, the chief executive who took over from the late Bill Lynch and has taken the group to even further heights. Upper Echelon was brought to you by Deloitte. For innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning, turn to Deloitte.